The morning sun cast long shadows across the mining camp on Kepler 442b as Dr. Kim Hana pulled on her protective gear. The air outside was toxic, filled with particles that could kill a human in minutes. But that was exactly why humans were here. The convergence considered their lives expendable. Hana had been studying alien ruins for 15 years, ever since Earth became part of the galactic community. It was not a partnership of equals. Humans were laborers, nothing more. They dug in. Dangerous places handled unstable artifacts and died when things went wrong. The three ruling species of the hegemonic convergence never risked their own people for such work. The Vextai were living crystals who could think faster than any computer. The Nethros existed as pure energy, able to pass through solid matter, like ghosts. The Zefkari had replaced their organic bodies with machines centuries ago, becoming perfect synthetic beings. Together, they had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. Every morning, Hana watched the convergence overseers float above the worksite in their protective bubbles. They never touched the ground, never breathed the poisoned air. A single Vextai supervisor could process more information in 1 second than Hana could in a week, yet she had begun to notice things they missed. The artifacts her team uncovered told stories that did not match official history. Carbon dating showed some ruins were older than the convergence claimed to be. Technological fragments suggested civilizations that should not have existed according to galactic records. But questioning official history was dangerous, very dangerous. Hana remembered the stories her grandfather told about the Corvani rebellion 800 years ago. An entire species had dared to fight back against convergence rule. 17 star systems had been turned to ash as punishment. Billions died. The message was clear to every species in the galaxy: obey or be destroyed. Her communication device buzzed with the daily work orders. Sector 7 needed clearing. Ancient machinery had been detected beneath the surface. The readings showed possible energy sources, which meant potential danger. Perfect work for expendable humans. As she walked toward the excavation site, Hana thought about the meeting she had witnessed the previous week. 3 human workers had been caught discussing resistance movements in hushed voices. The convergence. Response was swift. The men simply vanished. No trial, no explanation. Their families were told they had been transferred to other colonies, but everyone knew the truth. Back on Earth, Director Park Min-ho sat in his office reviewing resource quotas. The convergence demanded more food, more minerals, more workers, every year. In exchange, Earth received outdated technology and empty promises of protection. Protection from what? The convergence itself was the only real threat in the galaxy. Park looked at the latest reports from the outer colonies. Unrest was growing. Young humans were asking dangerous questions. Why should they serve masters who saw them as less than animals? Why should Earth bow to beings who had conquered their world through superior technology alone? The questions were spreading despite efforts to suppress them. Park knew that knowledge was dangerous. Every species that had challenged the convergence had been wiped out completely. But the questions would not stop coming. In the mining tunnels beneath Kepler 442b, Hana made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden beneath layers of debris, she found a chamber that should not exist. The walls were covered in symbols that matched no known language in the convergence database. The technology embedded in the stone was unlike anything she had seen before. Her hands shook as she took readings. The energy signatures were completely alien, yet somehow familiar. These were not convergence ruins. They belonged to someone else, entirely. Someone the official histories had erased. Hana quickly sealed the chamber and marked it as unstable on her reports. She needed time to study what she had found. Time to understand what it meant. The implications were staggering. If another advanced civilization had existed before the convergence, why were there no records? What had happened to them? That night, alone in her quarters, Hana studied the data she had secretly copied. The more she learned, the more questions arose. The technology was not just different from convergence systems, it was superior in many ways. How could such an advanced civilization simply disappear from history? The answer came to her slowly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. They had not disappeared. They had been erased. The convergence had rewritten history to hide their own origins. The mighty empire that claimed divine right to rule was built on lies and covered in blood. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, other humans were beginning to ask the same dangerous questions. They whispered in the depths of mines, in the shadows of factories, in the quiet corners of transport ships. The whispers were growing louder. The convergence had ruled through fear for a millennium. They had convinced every species in the galaxy that resistance was impossible. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the power of a simple truth. Even the mightiest empire could fall if enough people were willing to fight. The seeds of rebellion were planted. Soon they would grow into something the galaxy had not seen for 1,000 years. Hope. The ground beneath Tau Ceti 7 was different from anything Hana had ever seen. 3 months of careful digging had revealed structures that made no sense, according to everything she knew about galactic history. The metal walls seemed to flow like water, yet they were harder than diamond. Strange symbols covered every surface, glowing faintly with their own inner light. Li Jinwu crouched beside her in the narrow tunnel, his scanner beeping frantically. He was young, barely 25, but already one of Earth's best xenoarchaeologists. His excitement was obvious despite the danger they both knew they were in. "Look at these energy readings," he whispered, afraid to speak too loudly even though they were alone. "The power source is still active after thousands of years. Maybe tens of thousands. This technology is incredible." Hana nodded, her mind racing. The official galactic database claimed the convergence had ruled for exactly 1,000 years. Before that, the galaxy had been empty of advanced life. Every child learned this basic fact in school. Yet here was proof that someone else had built cities among the stars long before the convergence existed. The architecture was beautiful in a way that convergence buildings never were. Where convergent structures were cold and efficient, these ruins showed art and creativity. Whoever built this place had cared about more than just function. They had wanted to create something beautiful. "We need to document everything before we report this," Hana said quietly. Something deep in her gut told her this discovery was dangerous. Too dangerous. They worked through the night, taking detailed scans and photographs. The more they uncovered, the more amazing the find became. The builders had possessed technology that seemed to work on completely different principles from anything the convergence used. Where convergence machines were harsh and angular, these devices curved gracefully. Where convergence technology dominated its environment, this ancient tech seemed to work in harmony with natural forces. By morning, they had mapped 3 complete levels of the underground complex. Each level contained rooms filled with devices that still hummed with power. The builders had not just been advanced, they had been more advanced than the current rulers of the galaxy. Hana was preparing to send her initial report to Earth when her communication system went dead. All channels showed nothing but static. She tried the emergency frequencies, but those were blocked too. Someone was jamming their signals. "Ships in orbit," Jinwu called from the surface entrance. His voice was tight with fear. "Convergence patrol vessels, 3 of them." Hana's blood went cold. Convergence patrols were supposed to follow strict schedules. Random inspections were rare, and 3 ships meant serious business. They had been watching the excavation site, probably for weeks. The landing craft touched down an hour later. Hana watched through her periscope as armored figures emerged from the ships. Most were Zefkari soldiers, their mechanical bodies moving, with perfect precision. But the leader was different. A Vextai overseer floated above the ground, its crystalline body pulsing with dangerous colors. The Vextai's voice reached them through external speakers. The sound was like music, but cold and threatening. "All human personnel will evacuate this site immediately. Dangerous materials have been detected. The area must be cleansed for galactic safety." Hana knew this was a lie. The convergence wanted to destroy what they had found. The question was why. What were they so afraid of? She grabbed the most important data core and shoved it into a hidden pocket of her suit. If they were going to destroy everything, at least some evidence might survive. "We are scientists conducting authorized research," she called out as she climbed from the excavation site. "We have proper permits from Convergence Central Command." The Vextai overseer turned toward her, its faceted surface reflecting the morning light in rainbow patterns. "Permits are cancelled. This site contains hazardous materials that threaten galactic security." "What hazardous materials?" Hana demanded. "We have found only archaeological artifacts. Ancient ruins pose no threat to anyone." The overseer's light pulsed brighter. Behind it, Convergent soldiers began setting up equipment Hana recognized. With growing horror, molecular disruptors, weapons designed to break matter down to its basic atoms. They were going to erase everything. "Your protests are noted and rejected," the Vextai announced. "Evacuation will proceed immediately." As Convergence forces began their systematic destruction of the ruins, Hana tried one final desperate argument. "These artifacts could advance our understanding of galactic history. Think of the scientific value." The overseer's response came not in words, but in action. A beam of energy lanced down from orbit, striking the human settlement of New Busan 50 kilometers away. In seconds, 15,000 people were reduced to ash and vapor. Men, women, children, all gone in an instant. "The consequences of interference," the Vextai said calmly, as if it had just swatted an insect. Hana stared at the mushroom cloud rising in the distance. Those people had done nothing wrong. They had simply been unlucky enough to live near a discovery the Convergence wanted hidden. 15,000 lives erased to make a point. As she was loaded onto the transport ship with the other survivors, Hana clutched the hidden data core. Her hands shook with rage and grief, but her mind was clear. The Convergence had just made a terrible mistake. They had shown their true nature. Now she had proof of their lies and evidence of their crimes. The war had not started yet. But its first shot had been fired, and humanity would remember. The great assembly hall on Earth had never been so quiet. 200 representatives from every human colony sat in stunned silence as Director Park Min-ho displayed the evidence Dr. Kim Hana had risked her life to preserve. The holographic images showed ruins that predated the Convergence by thousands of years, technology that surpassed anything the galactic rulers possessed. "They lied to us," Park said, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive room. "For 1,000 years they told us they were the first advanced civilization in the galaxy. They claimed the right to rule because they were older and wiser than everyone else. But this is proof that another species came before them. A species that fought back and won." The data core contained more than just archaeological evidence. Hidden in the ancient computer systems, Hana had found records of the architects. They had been a peaceful species, much like humanity. They had explored the galaxy, built beautiful cities, and created art that celebrated life itself. Then the Convergence had come. The war between the architects and the Convergence had lasted 300 years. Unlike every other species the Convergence had conquered, the architects had refused to surrender. They had adapted, innovated, and fought back with weapons and tactics the Convergence could not counter. In the end, they had won. The Convergence had retreated to the outer rim of the galaxy, broken and defeated. "What happened to them?" asked Representative Kim Sunmi from the Mars colonies. Park looked grim. According to the records, they transcended physical existence. They became beings of pure energy and left this dimension behind. But before they went, they left something for us. Blueprints, weapon designs, everything we need to fight back. The room erupted in shocked voices. Some representatives demanded caution. Others called for immediate action. But Park raised his hand for silence. 15,000 people died at New Busan for the crime of living near the truth, he said. How many more will die if we do nothing? How many more species will be wiped out like the Corvani? I say enough. Today, humanity declares war on the hegemonic Convergence. The vote was not even close. 173 in favor, 27 against. For the first time in galactic history, a subject species had formally declared war on their masters. The Convergence response was swift and mocking. Propaganda broadcasts called humanity's declaration the desperate fantasy of a primitive species. They compared humans to insects trying to fight giants. Other species throughout the galaxy watched in horror, waiting for Earth to be destroyed as an example. But the convergence had made a crucial mistake. They expected humans to fight like everyone else had fought. They prepared for desperate frontal assaults by inferior technology. They readied their invincible battle fleets for glorious victories that would end the rebellion quickly. Captain Choi Daiho had other plans. His strike force looked like a joke compared to convergence battle groups. Converted mining ships, old research vessels, even civilian transports fitted with weapons. But Daiho had studied every military conflict in human history. He knew that superior technology meant nothing if you could not hit your target. The first battle took place near Jupiter's moons. A convergence patrol expected to find desperate human ships charging their battle line. Instead, they found empty space. The human fleet had split into dozens of small groups, hiding in asteroid fields and behind planetary rings. When the convergence ships spread out to search for them, the humans struck. Lieutenant Yoon Sora led the first boarding party in galactic history. Her team used modified architect technology to shut down the convergence ship's shields, then cut through the hull with plasma torches. The convergence crew had never faced enemies inside their own ships. They were not prepared for humans who fought with knives and explosives in narrow corridors. Within an hour, Sora's team had captured the bridge. They turned the ship's weapons on its own escort vessels, destroying 2 more convergence ships before the survivors could retreat. The galaxy watched in amazement as humans won battle after battle, using tactics no one had ever seen before. They did not try to match convergence technology. Instead, they attacked supply lines, communication stations, and isolated outposts. They struck fast and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Most shocking of all was humanity's willingness to die for victory. Convergent species had lived for thousands of years each. Death was their greatest fear. But humans lived short lives and seemed almost eager to sacrifice themselves for strategic advantage. Pilots would ram their ships into convergence vessels. Soldiers would detonate explosives even if it meant their own death. The Vextai, Nethros, and Zefkari had conquered the galaxy through overwhelming force and superior technology. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight fair. They had never encountered beings who saw death as acceptable if it meant freedom for others. After 6 months of defeats, the convergence began to realize they were not fighting a conventional rebellion. They were facing something new and terrifying. An enemy that adapted faster than they could respond. An enemy that turned their own strengths against them. For the first time in 1,000 years, the rulers of the galaxy felt something they had forgotten existed: fear. The message arrived on Kreeth Prime in the middle of their spawning season. It was a simple transmission from Earth, showing human ships destroying a convergence battle cruiser using nothing but courage and clever tactics. The Kreeth warriors watched the footage over and over, their compound eyes gleaming with excitement. Commander, Zixthak clicked his mandibles in what his species considered a smile. The Kreeth had always been fighters, but the convergence had broken their spirit centuries ago, with displays of overwhelming power. Now these soft-skinned humans were proving that the masters could bleed. If humans can fight them, so can we. Zixthak declared to his war council. We have claws and numbers. They have shown us the way. The Kreeth uprising began 3 days later. Unlike the humans who fought with technology and tactics, the insectoid warriors used their natural advantages. They could survive in environments that would kill other species. Their numbers were vast, and they felt no fear of death in battle. When convergence forces tried to suppress the rebellion, they found themselves facing millions of warriors who attacked in endless waves. On the waterworld of Delia, things moved more quietly but just as effectively. The aquatic Delians had always been peaceful, content to provide rare minerals from their deep ocean mines. But the massacre at New Busan had changed something in their collective mind. When human resistance broadcasts reached their underwater cities, the Delians made a decision that surprised everyone. The convergence mining stations began experiencing mysterious accidents, equipment failures, power outages, structural collapses. The Delians who worked these facilities seemed as puzzled as their overseers. But in the depths of their ocean cities, Teams of saboteurs planned each strike with careful precision. "The landwalkers have given us hope," sang Elder Coral Thess in the ancient language of her people. "If they can stand against the darkness, then we too must find our courage." Even species that had served the convergence faithfully for centuries began to question their loyalty. The seraphim, beings of light who had acted as convergence messengers, started delivering coded warnings to rebel forces. The rock-dwelling granite folk, who had built convergence fortresses for 800 years, began leaving structural weaknesses in their construction. The rebellion was spreading faster than the convergence could contain it, but their response was predictably brutal. Entire colonies were destroyed as examples. Civilian populations were relocated to prison worlds. The convergence message was clear: obedience or extinction. Admiral Kang Woo-jin knew that scattered uprisings would not be enough. Humanity needed a victory so decisive that every species in the galaxy would see it. They needed to prove that the convergence could be beaten in open battle, not just through raids and sabotage. The target was Fortress Alpha, a massive military installation that controlled 3 star systems. It was defended by the latest convergence technology and commanded by Overlord Thexvi, one of their most experienced generals. Taking it seemed impossible, which was exactly why Woo-jin chose it. The attack began with a deception that would have made ancient human generals proud. False intelligence suggested the main assault would come from the north, where human fleets had been gathering for weeks. Convergence forces repositioned to meet this threat, leaving other approaches lightly defended. The real attack came from 12 different directions at once. Small human fleets, supported by Kreeth boarding craft and Delian sabotage teams, struck simultaneously at weak points in the fortress defenses, but the key to victory was the new weapon Dr. Kim Hana had helped develop. Working with human military scientists, Hana had reverse-engineered architect technology into something humanity could build and use. The result was a device that could disrupt the quantum fields that powered convergence shields and weapons. For the first time in centuries, convergence forces found themselves fighting without their technological advantage. Lieutenant Colonel Kim Sun-ho led the assault team that captured the Fortress Command Center. His soldiers used architect-based weapons that cut through convergence armor like paper. The defenders, used to being invulnerable, panicked when their shields failed and their weapons stopped working. "Impossible," Overlord Thexvi transmitted, as his fortress fell around him. "The technology of the ancients was lost. How do you possess their weapons?" "Because we know the truth about your history," Sun-ho replied as he placed the convergence commander under arrest. "We know what really happened to the architects." The fall of Fortress Alpha sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time in 1,000 years, a major convergent stronghold had been captured intact. More importantly, the battle had been broadcast live to every world in the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as the supposedly invincible convergence forces surrendered to a coalition of rebel species. Back on Earth, Dr. Kim Hana worked through the night analyzing data recovered from the Fortress computers. What she found confirmed her worst fears and greatest hopes. The convergence was not what they claimed to be. They were the survivors of an ancient defeat, refugees who had spent millennia rebuilding their strength and rewriting history. The architects had not vanished mysteriously. They had won their war against the convergence so completely that their enemies had been reduced to hiding in the outer darkness of space. When the architects transcended physical existence, the surviving convergence forces had returned to claim the galaxy they had lost. "They're not ancient rulers," Hana told Director Park Min-ho over a secure communication link. "They're the remnants of a broken empire, ruling through lies and fear. If other species knew the truth, the convergence would fall in days." The tide had turned. The galaxy was awakening from 1,000 years of fear. The largest fleet in galactic history stretched across space like a constellation of hope. 2 years of impossible victories had led to this moment. Director Park Min-ho stood on the bridge of the flagship, Incheon, watching as ships from 47 different species prepared for the final battle. Humans, Kreeth, Delians, and dozens of others who had found their courage through humanity's example. All fleets report ready, announced Captain Choi Daeho over the communication system. He now commanded Ghost Squadron, the elite strike force, that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. The Nexus awaits. The Convergence Nexus hung before them like a dark star. It was not just a fortress, but a symbol of everything wrong with the galaxy. For 1,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire built on fear and lies. Today, that would end. Park looked around the bridge at faces from a dozen worlds. Young Lieutenant Kim Minji from the outer colonies, Commander Zixthak of the Kreeth, his insectoid features grim with determination, Navigator Coral Song of the Delians, her aquatic suit, gleaming under the ship's lights. All of them had lost friends and family to convergence brutality. All of them had chosen to fight. Remember, Park said into his microphone, addressing the entire fleet. We do not fight for conquest. We fight for freedom, not just for ourselves, but for every being who has suffered under convergence rule. The battle began with a display of power that would have terrified earlier generations. The convergence had gathered every remaining ship, every secret weapon, every desperate defense they possessed. Reality-tearing cannons opened holes in space itself. Gravity weapons crushed entire squadrons. Energy beams that could melt planets swept across the battlefield. But the Alliance had learned from 2 years of warfare against impossible odds. They did not meet force with force. Instead, they used the tactics that had served them from the beginning. Speed, adaptability, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Captain Choi Daeho led Ghost Squadron through the outer defenses like dancers weaving between raindrops. His pilots had trained for this moment, studying every weakness in convergence technology. Behind them came the main assault force, protected by the paths the Ghost Squadron had cleared. On the Kreeth battlecruiser, Warrior's Pride, Commander Zixthak prepared his boarding parties. His warriors were bred for combat, but they had learned something new from humanity. Victory was not just about fighting. It was about fighting for the right reasons. Today, we do not fight for glory, he clicked to his troops. We fight so that no species will ever again bow to masters who see them as less than dust. The Delian ships moved through space like fish through water, their crews working in perfect harmony. They had spent centuries building convergence mining equipment. Now they used that knowledge to target the weak points in convergence defenses. Every shot was precisely placed to cause maximum damage. Deep inside the Nexus, the convergence leadership gathered for their final stand. Overlord Supreme Kethvar, oldest of the surviving Vextai, pulsed with desperate light. Around him stood the last generals of an empire that had ruled through terror. Impossible, he broadcast to his forces. We are the superior beings. We are the rightful rulers of the galaxy. How can these primitives stand against us? But even as he spoke, Alliance forces were breaching the inner defenses. Human soldiers fought alongside Kreeth warriors and Delian saboteurs. Species that had been enemies for centuries now worked together with a unity the convergence had never achieved. Dr. Kim Hana moved through the Nexus corridors with a determination that surprised even herself. At 67, she was too old for military operations. But this was not just about war. This was about finishing what she had started in those ancient ruins on Tau Ceti 7. The Corps is just ahead, reported Sergeant Lee Wanho, her military escort. Convergence forces are retreating toward the Central Command Center. Hana nodded, checking the explosive charges in her pack. These were not ordinary weapons. They had been built using architect technology, designed specifically to destroy the quantum foundations that held the Nexus together. When they detonated, the fortress would not just be destroyed. It would be erased from existence. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the Nexus, a vast chamber where the convergence had stored the stolen knowledge of 100 conquered civilizations. Alliance forces poured in from 12 different entrances, surrounding the last defenders of a dying empire. You cannot win, Overlord Supreme Kethvar declared, his crystalline form blazing with desperate energy. Even if you destroy us, others will rise to take our place. The galaxy needs rulers. It needs order. Park Min-ho stepped forward, flanked by representatives of every allied species. The galaxy needs freedom, he said simply. Not rulers, not masters, just the chance for every being to choose their own path. The charges detonated simultaneously throughout the Nexus core. The explosion was visible from 100 light-years away, a brilliant star that marked the end of the galaxy's longest nightmare. As the shockwave spread, carrying with it the news of victory, 1,000 years of fear began to crumble. In the aftermath, as convergence forces surrendered across the galaxy, the survivors faced a question no one had asked for millennia. What came next? The answer was democracy. Not human rule replacing convergence tyranny, but cooperation between equals. Park's first act as Supreme Commander was his last. He dissolved his own authority and called for elections throughout the galaxy. Years later, on worlds beyond counting, memorials bore the same inscription in hundreds of languages. They dared when none would dare, and in their courage, we found our own. The galaxy was free.